everyone. Welcome to the Petersen Automotive Museum. I'm Jason, the Director of Education here, and today we're going to give you a little bit of a highlights of the museum. I'll show you a few cars, tell you a few stories, and just kind of introduce you to some of the content we have. One thing about the car is that it is one of the most critical inventions of the past century. I know we have computers and everything else, but cars really did revolutionize how we live, how we work, how we play, and everything else. So sitting behind me, I have this 1962 Thunderbird that really does capture an era. There was an era in the 50s. The highways were being built across the country. People had a little bit more free time. There was more prosperity. And so you had a situation that beyond being utilitarian devices like they had been earlier, cars were becoming part of our lives. It was someplace we wanted to be in. We wanted to go places. And in that case, you want to do so in style and in comfort. So the open top, added seats, off the road, a little bit of a tail fin here. Not there for anything practical other than it looks cool and it gave me a place to be and it became part of my life. Cars didn't start that way and they certainly haven't ended that way. So let's take a brief little perusal through the history of the automobile. Now humans have been putting wheels on things for a long time. We learned early on it actually is easier to move stuff if you have a rotating device instead of trying to drag stuff. So you had carriages and wagons and everything else. By the time you get to the 1700s and there's the introduction of industry, steam engines and the like, people were trying to figure out a way of motorizing transport, having self-propelled vehicles. The picture behind me here is truly what we consider the very first quote-unquote automobile. It's from 1769, it's known as the Cuno. It was nowhere near practical. That giant thing in the front was a steam boiler which had a tendency to maybe explode, and it was just so large and clumsy that it wasn't really easy to get around. But it did plant the ideas. So over the next 100 years, you had a variety of attempts to throw an engine, a motor of some type, on a carriage to make some form of self-propelled vehicle. This brings us to 1886 when you get this, what is largely considered the first practical automobile. This is a Benz patent motor wagon. And you will notice it looks radically different than a lot of cars you see. There's only 3 wheels. The wheels it does have are these tall, thin things. There's no auto parts stores if there's no cars. So what people are borrowing is things they know. Bicycles, carriages are the inspirations for some of this stuff. You have no steering wheels yet. No one's invented that. So you have a tiller that you move left or right to actually steer the vehicle. And there's no top or anything. Beyond those differences though, there are some elements here that are just like a car. The tiller, like a steering wheel, is all attached to a little apparatus here, which is a rack and pinion steering system, just like you would see in a lot of modern cars. What drives this is this engine in the back. This engine is a 4-stroke Otto cycle engine, just like you would see on cars today. You bring in fuel and air, you compress it, you explode it, power, there you go. This is only a 1-cylinder that gets about 3/4 of a horsepower, driving this to a top speed of 10. So the technology has evolved, but its basis is the same. You also notice this giant flywheel in the back. Cars have flywheels today. It's a way of balancing that reciprocating energy into a continuous motion. The other purpose for the flywheel in this, no dashboard, no place to stick a key. The way you get this car running, you grab this flywheel and start turning it. Eventually your car goes off and hopefully you had set the settings so the car doesn't take off with you still in the back trying to turn a wheel. So this gets the ball rolling. Cars are going to rapidly evolve past that. All kinds of new innovations and cars are going to take on more and more diverse looks. Leading not too much longer later to 1939 when you wind up with a car like this. This is a 1939 Bugatti Type 57. Now one thing with the early era of cars is you could get a complete car from a car company, right? The Model T is famous for this, right? Ford would give you a full car for $500. But if you had the means, you may want a car that's a little bit more unique, a little bit more bespoke, customized for you. So what you would do in those cases is you would go to a car company, in this case Bugatti, who would give you a chassis and an engine, and then even though they had options for you to body it, in this case the French government was commissioning this, they went to a separate company known as a coach builder, whose whole job was to build bodies. So in this case, you would customize a completely unique look for your automobile. The U in this case was the future Shah of Iran. The French government gave him this car on the occasion of his very first wedding. It does capture the spirit of the 30s. This is an era, what's known as the Art Deco movement. There's a fascination with industry, particularly with things like aviation. So you wind up with these very exaggerated fenders that look like wheel slats on planes. They go down into a running board, creating this image of long lines. There's chrome work in that's all getting across that sense of motion, of streamlining. But here again, it's all made for comfort and style. We see curves like this on cars today and think, oh, aerodynamics in that. In this case, it was far more aesthetic choice than it was any type of scientific decision. Now in that case, you have governments and companies in that involved. Sometimes making your own car can happen in your own garage. This is a 1953 Bosley Mark I. And Richard Bosley grew up in a family that was famous for growing roses. So he went to Ohio State University and studied horticulture. But he really liked, this was the 50s. People were getting into their cars. They liked their cars. They liked to go fast in that. Well, Richard Bosley got himself a brand new Jaguar, and one of his early attempts to go out and show how fast it could go is he got into a drag race against his mother's car, and he lost. At that point, he was like, I'm going to not do that again, and so I'm going to make my own car. So in his own garage, he put together this Mark I. Took a Corvette chassis and did his own fiberglass body on top. He didn't have all the fancy equipment to buff it down to size, so there's some parts of this fiberglass that are 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick. He also was going for endurance racing, things like the 24 hours of Sebring and that. You need gas, you don't want to stop at the pits all the time, so he put a 55-gallon fuel tank in the back. By the time you get to the end of it, the extra fiberglass, the huge fuel tank in that made it a little bit too heavy and a little bit too slow to actually compete at racing, but he wound up putting over 100,000 miles on it, and in the end, traded it in for another Corvette chassis that he made his second car. Some cars look radically different. This is actually a concept car. The Art Center College of Design is in Pasadena, and they're the world's leading school for transportation studies and automotive design. In this case, the designer was trying to come up with how our modern manufacturing techniques and all that could revolutionize the automobile. Think of it like when you're building a house. If you have the means, you go to an architect who will customize the house to be exactly what you want. In this person's eyes, why should cars be different? We're in an era of 3D printing and localized manufacturing. Make a car that fits you. He's a larger gentleman, so he wanted a very large cabin that he could fit in, but he also wanted a car that was awe-inspiring, was striking in some way. That gold look on it is not gold paint, that is actually gold plating. Now, you've seen some beautiful cars. That Bugatti is world-renowned for how striking it is. And sometimes that's the story we're here to tell, right? The style and the artistry of cars. Sometimes the cars are in the museum because they have a history. And this is a case right there. You may look at this and say, gosh, that one needs some restoration. But this is a vehicle that will not be touched. It will not be restored because what it is a piece of history. During the era of segregation, Esau and Janie Jenkins lived on Johns Island, South Carolina. It's a very poor community that the African American population of did not have access to schools and hospitals and the like. So they would have to drive into Charleston, the nearest town. Well, Esau and Janie Jenkins, right, love their neighbors and that would not have their own vehicles, would drive people into Charleston to get the services they need. It's also, though, the era of Jim Crow laws and particularly limitations on voting. So to actually vote, you would have to pass things like literacy tests or civics tests and the like to prove that you knew enough and all that. Well, if you haven't had access to proper schools and all that, that may prove to be an impediment to you being enfranchised, to be able to vote. So what Esau and Jenny Jenkins would do as they were traveling around, bringing people into town in their VW bus, they would give civics lessons. He would teach people the things they needed to know to actually be able to be approved to vote and to actually participate in the political system. So this becomes a hallmark of the civil rights era, and it becomes, in Esau and Janie's view, a tool for empowerment. Well, Esau dies in the early 70s, and the vehicle kind of just gets left in their backyard. In low country South Carolina, you're dealing with salt water and you're dealing with hurricanes. So over time, the elements had kind of taken its toll on the car. Until 2 years ago, when they finally decided we need to preserve this piece of history. So working with the Historical Vehicle Association, they had a very long process of extricating it from the ground that it had kind of sunk in, and it wound up being displayed on the National Mall last year. And fortunately for us, it's spending this year on display at the museum. So in this case, it's not the beauty of the car. I mean, it is a VW microbus that has a well-known history, but in this case, it's the history of this particular vehicle that makes it relevant for us.